Most collectors focus on the moment something becomes available. The release, the drop, the auction, the store opening its doors. But the real story of a collectible rarely starts there. It begins the day after distribution shifts. Because when the way collectibles reach collectors changes, everything changes. Prices move, communities react, scarcity evolves, and sometimes entire markets transform. Today, we're exploring something that collectors often overlook. What actually happens the day after distribution changes? When a collectible that once appeared in small specialty stores suddenly becomes global. When an item that once required insider connections suddenly becomes available online. Or when a product that once flooded the market suddenly becomes extremely difficult to find. Distribution may sound like logistics, but in the world of collectibles, it can determine rarity, value, and history itself. And the most fascinating part? The biggest effects rarely appear on the day distribution changes. They appear months or years later. Let's start with the moment everyone remembers. A company announces a new distribution model. Maybe a collectible manufacturer moves from boutique retailers to major global platforms. Maybe an auction house introduces online bidding. Maybe a brand decides to produce more units and distribute them worldwide instead of regionally. At the time, it often feels exciting. Collectors celebrate easier access. New fans can finally participate, and the market feels more inclusive. From the outside, the decision makes perfect sense. Companies want larger audiences. Collectors want availability. Markets want liquidity. So the shift happens. Distribution expands. More people can buy. More people can participate. And for a brief moment, the collectible world feels like it just got bigger. Because in that moment, everyone assumes one thing. More access means more success. The day after distribution shift, everything still looks fine. Collectors are excited. New buyers flood the market. Online forums and collector groups explode with activity. Prices may even rise. Why? Because new demand arrives faster than new supply stabilizes. People who previously couldn't buy now rush to secure items. Resellers jump in. Collectors compete. Auction listings multiply. For a while, it can look like distribution expansion is a huge success. The market is active. Communities are energized. More people are talking about the collectible than ever before. From the outside, everything appears healthy. And that's why the next phase is so difficult to notice. Because the early signals of change are quiet. This is where the invisible shifts begin. Distribution changes something fundamental about collectibles. Perceived rarity. Even if production numbers remain the same, wider distribution changes how collectors interpret availability. An item that once required insider knowledge to acquire may now appear everywhere online. Collectors begin seeing listings daily instead of occasionally, and perception begins to shift. What once felt rare may suddenly feel common, even if technically it isn't. Another subtle shift happens in collector behavior. When access becomes easier, urgency often disappears. Collectors who once rushed to buy immediately may start waiting. They believe the item will always be available. That small behavioral change can dramatically reshape markets. Meanwhile, sellers begin adjusting too. Resellers increase listings. Speculators join the market. Inventory builds. None of these changes feel dramatic, but slowly the ecosystem evolves. And what looked like a simple logistics change begins influencing psychology, pricing, and long-term demand. The consequences of distribution shifts rarely appear overnight. Instead, they arrive slowly, sometimes years later. A collectible that once maintained stable value begins fluctuating more frequently. Price spikes become shorter. Demand becomes more volatile. Why? Because the collector base itself has changed. When distribution expands, the audience grows. But not all participants are collectors. Some are traders. Some are investors. Some are simply curious newcomers. That diversity introduces new behavior patterns into the market. More buying cycles, more selling cycles, more speculation. Suddenly, the collectible world feels faster, more dynamic, and occasionally more unpredictable. But nothing broke overnight. The market simply adapted. Most people don't ignore changes. They simply don't notice them yet. There are several reasons for this. First, collector optimism. People want their collectibles to succeed, so they focus on positive signals and dismiss negative ones. Second, recency bias. If prices recently increased, collectors assume the trend will continue, even if the market conditions underneath have shifted. Third, community momentum. When forums, social media groups, and collector communities remain active, it creates the impression that everything is stable. But activity doesn't always equal sustainability. And finally, there's emotional investment. Collectors form deep connections with the items they collect. Those connections make it harder to objectively analyze the market, so the subtle signals often go unnoticed until much later. Experienced collectors view distribution changes very differently. They don't judge the decision itself. Instead, they watch what happens afterward. They ask questions like, how quickly does supply stabilize? Does the community grow organically or suddenly? Are collectors holding items or flipping them quickly? Is enthusiasm coming from collectors or from speculation? Experienced collectors also watch behavior patterns, not just prices. They observe how long items remain listed. They track how often listings appear. They monitor whether collectors talk about enjoyment or only about profit, because these signals reveal something deeper, whether a collectible is becoming culture or becoming inventory. And that difference can determine long-term value. The lesson here isn't to avoid distribution changes. Markets evolve. Technology evolves. Collector communities evolve. Distribution will always change. The real lesson is this: plan for the day after. Whenever distribution expands, ask one simple question: what will this collectible ecosystem look like in 5 years? Not tomorrow, not next month. 5 years. Will more collectors join the hobby? Will the community grow stronger? Will the collectible still feel meaningful? Because the healthiest collectible markets aren't defined by availability. They're defined by passion. And passion survives distribution changes, as long as collectors remain the heart of the ecosystem. Most collectible markets don't change the day distribution shifts. They change in the months, the years, and sometimes even decades that follow. Because the real story isn't about how collectibles reach collectors. It's about how collectors respond once they do. If this episode changed how you think about collectible markets, that's the goal. This is the day after. And next time, we'll explore something just as fascinating: the day after a collectible goes viral. Because sometimes attention can change a market even faster than distribution.